Welcome to another episode of Rose Resource Room, where we provide encouragement, share resources, and insights to help our families navigate their unique home-centered educational journeys. My guest today is the founder of the Homeschool Legal Defense Association and is a longtime champion for education, freedom, and parental rights. His work has shaped the modern homeschooling movement and influenced policies locally and internationally. Welcome, Mr. Farris. Thank you so much for joining us today.
It is a privilege to be with you, Ro. Thank you so much.
Thank you. So I wanted to actually jump in because you have been such an amazing advocate and pioneer in this home-centered education homeschooling journey. And I wanted to see if you could probably share a defining moment when you realized the importance of legal advocacy for homeschooling families.
Wow. Okay. Well, it would be at the very beginning. My family started homeschooling in 1983. Excuse me, 82. I'll correct that. And we had our daughter oldest daughter in a Christian school up until then. She was in first grade when we first heard about homeschooling. And my wife and I heard about it independently from each other. But basically from the same guy. I met him in person when he was recording a television show with Tim and Beverly Hay, and she heard him on Focus on the Family. But it was the same man that made the presentation. And so as soon as the word got out in the Pacific Northwest, where we lived at the time, that we were homeschooling, I started getting inundated with legal requests because it was illegal to homeschool in Washington State unless you were a certified teacher. And my wife had been a certified teacher, but her certification had lapsed, so it was illegal for us as well. We didn't hide that fact because, in fact, we ended up on the front page of the Seattle Times with a story about homeschooling. But right away, I saw that people were going to have legal problems, and they wanted help. And when people want a Christian lawyer, what they really want is a free lawyer. And I figured out pretty quickly this is a great way to go broke. And so the idea of Homeschool Legal Defense Association just was kind of almost self-evident to me that if we all joined together, and I didn't use this term in my head at the time, but the best way to express it is we basically formed a union for homeschoolers. That if we all paid a little bit of, of annual dues, then we can bring a big force to the fight because no one family can afford, usually, I mean, there's probably, 1% of homeschoolers who could afford to fight, but 99% of homeschoolers can't really afford the fight if it came down to, depending on their family resources alone. And so the idea of everybody paying an annual fee so that we could all stick together and fight with full resources, that came to me in 1983, and the organization is now 42 years old and with around 100,000 family members.
If that's not the definition of legacy, I don't know what is. Thank you so much for all the work that you've done.
Yeah.
What would you say has been the change in perception of homeschooling since you started HSLDA?
Well, an easy way to do this is when I was on airplanes and people often ask, especially when it's two guys, what do you do? And so when I told them I was a lawyer for homeschoolers, the first question I got back in the early days was, "Is that legal? And can you do that?" And the answer in those days, depending on what you thought of as the basis of legality, since I thought the Constitution of the United States was the highest law of the land because I'd read it, then I thought it was legal under the Constitution. But state laws and state officials had a different view. And so generally speaking, it was not viewed by the officials as legal. And so the public reaction to that was that. The second phase was, what about socialization? Once, and so, there's 1,000 answers to that. But the third phase, and the one that I was in before I retired from active employment with HSLDA. I'm still the chairman of the board, but I went to run Alliance Defending Freedom as their president. The question was, well, why do the homeschoolers need lawyers? So the perception was that homeschooling was weird and illegal, and it's now that it's a good thing. It's probably legal. And one of the things that really changed, I think, in a really powerful way, but not very well recognized, is during COVID, every family in America, in their minds, was some form of a homeschooling family. And so whether it was officially homeschooling or, whatever it really was, they identify as people who were in charge of their kids' education more effectively than they had ever been before. And a lot of the education was taking place at home. And so that identification with us has really important political consequences for good, because the public's view of homeschooling ultimately is very important to our ability to win legislative battles and other things. And so I think that America is more aligned with homeschooling than ever. And the other thing that homeschoolers did for public school parents in particular during the pandemic scare was they knew that homeschooling existed and that we were pretty good academically. And so it gave them confidence that, well, maybe it'll be okay for my child, because, it's okay for these homeschoolers. Well, maybe it'll be okay for us as well. And so that confidence that we gave to everybody was a pretty important thing. So all in all, it's been a long journey. A lot of good things have happened. The reality is there's still real fights. But the good news is the public perception is much greater on our side than it was in 1983.
You're absolutely right. And I would add that there's a little bit more respect for homeschooling families
Yeah.
because people would see me in the supermarket and say, "Oh, the kids are off today." And I said, "No, they're homeschooling." They're like, "Oh, yeah, I remember that during the pandemic. I send them right back." So I think there's a level of respect for a parent who actually likes and loves their child enough to spend the whole day with them.
Yes, indeed.
And also, unfortunately, the socialization question is still around. I started my home-centered education in 2022, and I remember people ask me all the time, "Aren't you worried about socialization?" And in the beginning, even though I wasn't worried, I would spend the time to explain, "Oh, they're in co-ops, they're in this, they have all these different opportunities to socialize." And I mean, if we're going out, they're people outside, so they can always socialize, even though it's not someone who's 6 months or older or less than them, right? So eventually, my answer became, yes, I'm very concerned about socialization, and that's why I pulled them out. And it
I,
was that,
that's a very great and common experience. I actually ran into a guy in 1993 who was a sociologist for the Smithsonian Institute. And what he did is he studied societies where there was no formal education.
ah,
Um, and he had been at that particular task for about 35 years at the time I met him. I actually had him come and speak at a homeschool leadership conference after we met. And he was fascinated with homeschooling. What he told me was, a revolutionary thought for me, and that is the definition of socialization to a sociologist is how we teach the rules of society from one generation to the next. And it's not about how kids get along with other kids.
that's right.
That's a subset of it.
Hmm.
The real definition of socialization, because if you have a sociopath, what you have is somebody who's not adapted to the rules of society.
Hmm.
Well, so the question is, do you want fellow 5 and 6 year olds teaching your kids the rules of
That's
society?
right.
Or do you want adults that you trust their worldview, meaning you, teaching the kids the rules of society? And so and then you can learn to get along with others a lot of different ways, including, my kids did sports and
Hmm.
Ohana and church activities, and they play with the neighbor kids and ballet. And, after 3 o'clock in the afternoon, homeschoolers' lives, for the vast majority, look just like everybody else's life
That's right.
after. And so when it's time to do math, let's do math. When it's time to learn to read, let's learn to read.
That's right.
It's time to learn to get along with others. Let's learn to get along with others by playing softball together.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's such a false sense of society when you have everyone the same age, plus or minus a couple months. And I see how that transfers into adulthood. I was talking to one of my friends and she said, "It's so hard for me to find friends around here." And I said, "Wow, in your congested neighborhood, you can't find any friends. She said, yeah, and then she started to share the demographics. And I'm like, okay, so because this person is not 4 months older than you or 4 months younger, they can't be your friend. Because they have four children instead of one child, they can't be your friend. And it's really this mindset that's created that all your friends need to be your peers, plus or minus something.
That's a great illustration. I experienced that story a way that shocked me about 20 years ago or so. I was a girls softball coach for many years, and I was a very good girls softball coach. My teams almost always won the championship and never was less than second place. So parents like to get their girls on my team because we win. And so one year I called this lady up to tell her that the league had assigned her daughter to my team. And she said, well, who's else is on the team? And I read her the names of these girls. There were 3 homeschool girls on my team and 12 public school girls. And I read her the names and she said, oh, I don't think I want my daughter on your team because those are mostly 8th graders. And my daughter's a 7th grader. And I don't know that she can get along with 8th graders. And I wanted
Right.
to yell at her, what about socialization? Yeah.
Right. Absolutely. And I honestly have to say, like, not to harp on this issue, but I honestly have to say that my children had so many more opportunities to socialize as a result of being homeschooled. And I'm not talking about field trips or co-ops or
Right.
communities. I'm talking about us going to the library and me standing X amount of feet back and saying, go to the librarian, hand them your card, and politely tell them that you'd like to check this book out. Or go to the librarian and ask them this question. Go over to that aisle and ask the person in the supermarket, where can I find the XYZ? And that's the opportunity to socialize with real
Yeah.
people, not just your peers.
Yeah, indeed. I had, in fact, the socialization question was the first question I asked about homeschooling.
Yeah.
But the answer, when I knew, like deep down at a very high level of confidence that it was working, was when my oldest daughter was 14. And uh, she'd been homeschooled for 8 years or something like that since at that point in time. And so my wife and I was on the board of a Christian human rights group based in Switzerland, and we had our annual meeting in Paris this particular year. And so we had a break, and my wife and I went for a walk during the break, and we were supposed to go back to the lunch. We left our daughter, our 14-year-old daughter, in the room at the facility, and we didn't get back in time. So she went to the lunch by herself, as she should have. It was fine. And so we get back to the room about the lunch about 10 minutes late. And there's our 14-year-old daughter seated between a priest from Portugal and a barrister from Cambridge, England, carrying on this very animated conversation, getting along with other people of different ages, doing just fine. The day we got home from that trip, she was in the basement of our house playing Barbies with her friend, or with not her friends, not her 14-year-olds don't play, but she was playing with her little sisters. And so she was getting along with her little sisters. And then we saw her a couple of days later in the church youth group activities, and she's getting along with people her own age. So she could get along with people younger than her. Right. She could get along with people older than her, from different cultures, different countries, different language groups. It didn't matter. She had learned how to get along with everybody. And that's one of the goals of a well-socialized kid.
Absolutely. Now tell me, I'm curious, how has your faith shaped your approach to law and education and advocacy?
Well, there is no doubt that it's hand in hand. The reason I wanted to be a lawyer was my dad was a public school principal, and he hated what the ACLU was doing to make the public schools godless. And so he wanted me to be a lawyer to help the public schools fight against godless approach to education. Well, by the time I got through law school, the schools were largely on the same side as the ACLU. But from the beginning, I wanted to be a lawyer helping Christians defend Christian values and causes. I didn't know exactly what that meant. I had a special interest in education, but God led, and I can tell you a bunch of stories, but I'll just tell you one. that will illustrate how God has been involved in, the legal part of this. I was defending a homeschooling family in Ohio many years ago, and the superintendent at that time, Ohio law basically gave sole discretion to a local superintendent on whether they're allowed to homeschool or not. And so this superintendent denied the family, and we were, another lawyer at HSLDA at that time handled all the contact work and for Ohio, and I did all the litigation nationwide for HSLDA. And so I was on a plane flying to Ohio to meet with this lady a day ahead of the trial to get prepared for the case. And I realized that even though I'd already filed a brief arguing that she was a Christian and had religious freedom rights, as I looked the file closer, I didn't really know where she was coming from spiritually.
Mm.
I based that on something somebody else had written, and I'm not sure. So I got to her home. It was a lovely June day. We were sitting out back in her backyard at her picnic table, and I went through all our curriculum and all the other stuff we had to do to show that she had a good program for her kids. But then I came to the point where I needed to ask her about her faith so I could prove that she had a religious freedom case.
Right.
And it was really quickly obvious to me that she was not a believer. She liked the idea of God, but that was about it. And so I shared the gospel with her, and she prayed to receive Christ. And I was over the moon ecstatic. And I told her, I believe that God's going to do something powerful in your case tomorrow to welcome you to the family of God. And I told her to start reading the Bible, start with the book of John. So I was just thrilled. So we get to court the next day. Judge calls the lawyers in chambers, and he said, Mr. Farris, I've read your brief. It's a pretty good brief, but you're going to lose today. Now, I've been in courts where the judge has made up his mind before you go to court, but they're not supposed to say so. And so immediately, of course, since I told her that, God was going to do something powerful in her case tomorrow, I hoped that she had not read Deuteronomy where it says, thus saith the Lord. If the false prophet says that, that God's going to do something, he doesn't going to do it, you're supposed to stone the false prophet to death. I hope she stayed in the book of John like I told her. And so I could not bring myself to tell her the whole truth of what the judge had said. I just said to her, it's going to be tough in here today. Okay. And so we started off. And the superintendent was put on the stand by the prosecutor. It came my turn to cross-examine him. I about 2 questions in, and a question popped into my head. I never asked it in any other case in my life. And it's actually kind of a silly question, but I asked it anyway. I said, did you get any legal advice before you denied this family the right to homeschool? And he said, well, I didn't talk to any lawyers or anything like that, but I talked to some government officials. I said, well, like who? He said, well, like the judge here for one. I said, this judge about this case before it was ever filed in court? And he goes, yeah. We won that day.
Praise God.
And so I have seen God fight for his people. And after, 25 years of doing it, God had case after case, legislature after legislature, family after family had built a wall of protection for homeschoolers that nobody believed was possible. And but I saw him do it time and again, and I'm an eyewitness to seeing the hand of God in our country, our lives, and our movement that is unmistakable in any way you want to look at it.
Thank you so much for sharing that. These stories it's like you look at the stories in the Bible with Daniel in the lion's den and like Jonah and the whale, and people think that God is not doing those big miracles. And then you hear these things and you're like, he absolutely is. I had the opportunity to spend about 3 days last month with Zan Tyler, and she had me in tears sharing some of the things that you all went through. Like maybe she went prepared to say one thing and then the Holy Spirit led her to say another thing, like similar to your story. And I was just like, Zan, you should have prepared me. I wasn't ready to like bawl my eyeballs out, but I just love hearing these stories about God moving because these are the modern day miracles and I love them. Thank you for sharing that.
Sure.
So, what advice would you give to the next generation of homeschooling advocates? Because you've done the heavy work, but we need to keep moving.
Well, first of all, let me just say that there's heavy work coming. Illinois is posed to make homeschooling really, really difficult in a bill that's going through right now. Virginia narrowly missed doing the same thing. there are efforts afoot in many states, and it's going to be. Unfortunately, this has become a partisan kind of thing. It shouldn't be this. It hasn't always been this way, but these days, states controlled by the Democrats are going to be very likely to attack homeschool freedom, and so we're going to see great problems with that coming up. But so the advice is, don't rest on your laurels, for heaven's sakes. You know, the price of liberty is eternal vigilance. And it's not just an abstraction. People shouldn't say, well, everything's just going fine. Well, everything might be going fine. And then when you take the idea that red states and blue states are, blue states are more vulnerable. Well, there are blue cities and school districts within red states. And so if you're in a more left-leaning city within a conservative state, well, the school district could come after you,
right.
As well. And so we are never supposed to rest on our laurels. And so the things that got us, that God used to bring us to this level of freedom are basically two things. God used HSLDA as the legal team, and God used state organizations as the political legislative lobbying team. And so people need to be supporting their state organizations, and people need to be a part of HSLDA. And if they do both those things, then the team that basically brought them to the dance needs to be the ones that keeps dancing with them.
That's right.
And so we need to keep doing it. And then mostly, above all that, we need to do all that. Yes, we need to depend on God. And the day we start thinking it's about us is the day we're really vulnerable.
That's really good. And I hear what you're saying in terms of you can't even rely on left or right or red or blue, because I'm actually in New Jersey, even though I'm doing this for Pennsylvania, and we are a low regulation blue state. And then right next to us, we have Pennsylvania that's typically red, and they have higher regulations. And then on the other side, we have New York that's blue that has high regulation. So there's so much of a shuffle happening. But my point in saying that is a lot of people in New Jersey have actually started to just kind of sigh and kick back thinking, oh, we're safe, we're low regulation. And I'm like, okay, that's good. Thank you, HSLDA, for all the years that we have been. But this is when you start to prepare for war, not when you're being attacked, right?
Indeed. And so and it could change in a moment's notice. All you need
one legislative session away.
And one particular legislator who gets a bee in his or her bonnet, that wants to come after you. Somebody gets to them and tells them some horror story or whatever, then Katie, bar the door. We're going to be in difficult times. And so being a part of state organizations, being a part of HSLDA, knowing your friends, being a part of local support groups, basically sticking together. That's the theme. Sticking together is essential. Knowing your rights doesn't hurt, but sticking together,
unity,
and depending on God, those are the deals.
Perfect. Thank you so much. Now, can you give us a sneak peek of what you'll be sharing at the CHAP convention? Just a tease.
Well, I'm going to be talking about the broader battle for on parental rights as a big part of it. Homeschooling is a subset of that, and so the attacks on homeschooling will be a component of it. But the attack on parents in the medical space, with all the desires to override parents who don't want to be affirming on transgenderism and other kinds of decisions of that nature, vaccine decisions. There's an ongoing belief that the village, it takes a village to raise a child. The village should be the one making decisions for parents, not parents themselves. So we'll be talking about parents' rights, both for homeschooling and broadly. Also be talking about civics. I have a new civics curriculum out, and so the importance of parents knowing civics themselves and making sure that their kids are civically educated, constitutionally educated. If we're going to make sure that our kids are great citizens in the years ahead. We got to teach them.
That's right.
If they're not going to learn it by osmosis, we got to teach them. So
Exactly.
those are a couple of the themes I'll be talking about.
Beautiful. Thank you for sharing. My husband and I talk about it all the time because I personally feel like the founding fathers are turning in their graves saying, what happened to we the people? You show up every 4 years and you think that's your only civic duty. You give your vote away and then you say, okay, now we voted the president. What happened to the local? What happened to all the other things you should do, right? I was called for jury duty and I was so excited and I got dismissed and I was telling my friends and they were like, oh, that's so good. And I'm like, no, I actually wanted to do it. It's not an
Yeah.
inconvenience. I wanted to serve.
Well, that's good. I mean, more all the judges in America want people like you to grow and flourish because so many people try to get out of jury duty. And I was actually called into a jury about a month ago. I got dismissed as well, but
Yeah. And I can tell that people try to get out a lot because the narrative is, I know it's inconvenient. I know there are other things you could be doing. Like they were literally speaking to the fact that I know you don't want to be here, but please serve if you
yeah,
can.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
All right. So we've covered a lot today. If you could leave homeschooling parents and advocates with one key message or encouragement, what would it be? I know it's always tough when I ask for one thing.
My wife and I homeschooled our kids all the way through. We have 10 kids. It was 33 years of homeschooling. And we would not trade it for the world. It does not mean that your kids will be perfect.
Mhm.
There's no guarantees there. But it means that you have made it much more likely that they will love God and serve God and that they will, share your values, they're going to differ from you here and there, but they're going to share your core values and they're going to be friends with each other for life. If you want those things to happen, then homeschooling is for you and you stick with it. You don't give up. It doesn't happen overnight, but you stay the course and keep at it. God's going to bless your socks off in a way that you will enjoy when you get to the stage of life. Now, we have now 31 grandchildren and actually one great grandchild. I don't know how that happened when I'm only like 19. I guess I am. I don't know. Maybe I'm 20. Anyhow, it, it's rewarding in a deep way that you'll never regret.
That resonated with me so deeply. I really appreciate you sharing these insights. Your work has had such a profound impact on countless families, just ensuring that we are able to educate children in the way that aligns with our values. So, thank you for your dedication to this cause and your leadership.
Thank you.